Well, today on the show, I'm joined once again by Professor Michael Huemer. Professor Huemer and I sit down today to talk about his book, Dialogues on Ethical Vegetarianism. This book is a fantastic way for somebody to begin to understand and engage with the idea of vegetarianism, to understand the ethical and moral questions, conundrums, and thoughts that surround veganism. It follows two individuals, M and V, who meets to have a meal once a week and discuss some of the core concerns, problems, and issues in this space. I also decided to jump through Peter Singer's recently re-released book, Animal Liberation Now. Animal Liberation was originally published in the mid-70s, I think, 1975, and there's been a few editions since then, but this one came out in 2023. I thought it would help for this conversation to bolster a few other areas of interest and concern. Michael's book is well worth picking up and checking out, and if you enjoy it and you want to dive even further in, you can obviously check out Peter Singer's book. Michael mentioned after we stopped recording that he's actually going to be releasing a second edition on dialogues on ethical vegetarianism. He's got a due date of December 2024 to pass the final draft over to the editors for the release of that book. So when that book does eventually come out, I'll make sure that's also linked in the description and the show notes. If it's your first time checking out the show, I'd ask you to subscribe. And then if you're on YouTube or Rumble, if you select the bell notification icon, that's going to remind you whenever we release a video here on the channel. So make sure you subscribe and do that. And if you wouldn't mind sharing this with your friends, your family, your followers, we grow because you take the time to share our content. We don't do ads, we don't do marketing, we do honest conversations with the hope that they have an impact on you and your life, and that you'll share those with people who you think will also enjoy them. Okay, enough of that. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Professor Michael Huemer on dialogues on ethical vegetarianism. Cheers. Hello and welcome to the show. My name's Samuel. Today I'm joined once again by Professor Michael Huemer. Professor Huemer, it's great to have you back on.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is time number 3. I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about your book, Dialogues on Ethical Vegetarianism. I found it to be a beautiful read. Yeah, it's such an interesting book. I mean, you've kind of gone for the classic sort of dialogue approach, and I keep wanting to say dialogues concerning ethical vegetarianism, but I'm trying to stick away from getting that slip up. Just before we kind of dive into it, what made you want to write a book in this sort of kind of back and forth dialogue way?
Well, I thought that this is the most accessible form for philosophy. When you introduce students to philosophy, sometimes you use Plato, and that's one of the easiest ways to get into it. Like, it's a lot easier than getting into it through Aristotle or something, because Aristotle is like a series of lecture notes, and Plato is and people pay attention, and also this was suitable for dialogues because there's a lot of sort of arguments back and forth. There's a lot of somebody just like raising another point, and then there's a fairly quick counter to it, right? So, it's not like there are some other topics where you just have to go through a long explanation and then it's not so suitable, but this is pretty suitable.
Yeah, I found it to be a really, really interesting read. I mean, obviously, kind of people think about sort of David Hume and dialogues concerning natural religion, which has got that sort of interesting beginning where those two people are talking about a sort of conversation that they've overheard, and one of them is relaying it back to the other one, which is obviously it's a fantastic and really interesting book. And this one I thought was really interesting with these two people kind of meeting over a few weeks and kind of allowing the ideas that they're kind of getting into to slowly work their way into their sort of kind of actual moral practice, which I thought was quite an interesting spin on it.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really interesting. I mean, I've got a whole host of questions. We could be diving quite heavily into the book and a lot of the surrounding subject. But I want to understand, Professor Huemer, from you, kind of what was it that, or when was it that you kind of first began to have, I guess, your eyes opened up to ethical vegetarianism and begin to make the change to become a vegan?
Well, I was in college, so this was like whatever 30 years ago or something. Is it more than 30 years ago? And I mean, I had a friend in college at the time who had a bumper sticker that said, "Friends don't let friends eat meat." And, uh, but he didn't actually like forcibly stop me from doing it. um, he just caused me to think about, what, why are we doing this? Like, is this? I mean, I kind of know why we're doing this because it's enjoyable to us, but like, you know, is it really okay to kill other creatures just because you want to cut off their body parts and stick them in your mouth? And I don't think I would like that if somebody killed me in order to chop me up and eat my body parts. It seems kind of bad. And you start thinking about like, yeah, why would that be okay? Like, normally it's wrong to inflict pain and suffering. Pain and suffering are bad. Does that only apply to us? Only our pain and suffering is bad, or it seems like it would be bad for anyone who can experience it. So, and it's just giving me a little bit of pleasure. It doesn't really seem like this is moral.
Makes sense. Does make sense. I guess kind of for you and for your journey, was it a sudden you woke up one day and that was it? You've become a vegan, or did you switch to vegetarianism and then over this kind of slow progression become a vegan? Like, how did that shift happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think um, I think it took a few months of thinking about it to become vegetarian. Which like to my current perspective seems unreasonable because I think like the case is really clear cut. But it is hard for people to just like change their lifestyle, right? It's like no matter what the arguments are, there's a certain amount of initiative, a certain amount of inertia, and then it took a while for me to give up dairy, and I didn't really think it through completely, right? But like the actual reason why you should give it up is the cruelty of farming practices. But at first, I didn't really know about these practices. I knew that we had to kill animals in order to eat them. That's what I knew. But I think I basically thought, well, you don't really have to kill animals in order to get their milk, so it doesn't seem so bad, right? But actually, no, there's just enormous cruelty in the whole dairy industry. So you should want to not support that either. And then so like it's like it took me a couple of decades to decide that I should stop the dairy products too.
It's fair play. Yeah, it's fair play. And I guess obviously you use the term ethical vegetarianism for the title of your book, rather than the term veganism. I was kind of more familiar with the term veganism just because I only really got my eyes opened up to this sort of entire space in 2020 during lockdown. Just had more time to watch videos, stumbled across a few horrific videos on YouTube of factory farming, and yeah, kind of got my, as I've already mentioned, got my eyes open up to this space. So veganism is like the term that I'm more familiar with. And I guess I'd like to understand kind of why you've gone for ethical vegetarianism over veganism for this dialogue.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I thought vegetarianism was the more familiar word for people. So I thought maybe people would know what that was more. And I guess I thought it sounded like less of an extreme position. I don't want to sound like an extremist, even though I am. Um, um, But sometimes people ask me about, well, what if you have like humanely farmed products? And I mean, first when they say something is free range or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean very much, right? However, there are like some animal welfare organizations that they will certify something, right? So and you can't just trust the company. Okay, all right, but anyway, so if it's humanely raised, would you still eat the meat? And I think I don't know. It might be permissible, but I wouldn't do it. Um, but if it's really humanely raised, I think I would accept the other products that don't require killing the animal. So I would accept the eggs or the dairy if I wasn't lactose intolerant, um, uh, if it was humanely raised. So right, and actually, like strictly speaking, I'm not even a vegetarian because I think scallops and clams are okay, right? Because they don't have a brain, so they don't have suffering or negative experiences.
That makes sense. And I think something that I kind of, when I began to, as I mentioned before, kind of see this stuff in 2020, I kind of began to realize that veganism, I guess for me and even for my family, is more of a sort of kind of progression than a default endpoint. And that might sound kind of a bit weird, but I guess kind of I've classed veganism until kind of reading your work and others in preparation for the show to kind of almost be the sort of the desire to reduce animal suffering wherever one can. And actually, it's kind of as you begin to look and kind of survey your life, I guess, slowly reducing and then eliminating bit by bit the different areas and elements that are actually kind of contributing towards animal suffering. How do you think we should define veganism for this? Is it a process or is it a definitive position?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess I would usually describe it as a certain practice of, abstaining from animal products. Um, there are a lot of animal products. So it's not just in your food. And you're like, people put in a lot of clothing. So like wool and like, if you want to get an overcoat, it requires some effort to not get wool. Or you want to get a belt, you have to make a point that it's not leather. Um, shoes, Um, like a surprising number of things turn out to be not vegan, whatever, like shampoo that was tested on animals. So um, there's sort of like, well, there's the initial step that you could take of just not buying the meat, and then like, there's just a lot further that you can go to get sort of like small increments of reducing the suffering that you're contributing to. It's not actually possible to completely eliminate it because it's sort of like everything is tied to everything else, and like even the plant farming is still tied to killing animals in the fields, right? Because animals are pests or whatever. They're there, or they're just like trying to live in the fields where you're trying to grow crops. So, it can't be completely eliminated, but you can eliminate the worst parts of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. I really struggle finding beer that's not got some sort of animal product in it. I know it sounds weird, but they seem to use, I don't know whether it's something like bacteria from fish intestines or something like that to make it kind of clear rather than a cloudy beer. So if you were to buy like a hazy beer, that's usually okay, but a clearer beer is usually gone through some sort of animal product to get it into that state, which I didn't realize until I began to kind of research this. And it's not on the back of a can or anything. So it's really hard to tell what's okay and what isn't.
Right. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, kind of like shocking, like how just how cavalierly we're gonna kill the animals and use their body parts just for like completely trivial reasons.
yeah, it's
It's like,
crazy.
oh yeah, we'll make the beer clearer. You know, rather like that's what you died for. Okay. Like, like, okay, the animal can't even understand this, but, imagine if it could understand this, imagine trying to explain to another creature that that's what they have to die for. And, there's something that like they produce sugar using bone char, which is like, they just like somehow they use the bones of some animals in preparing the sugar. I don't know how they do this, but you don't have to do this, but somehow it's slightly more convenient.
I did not know that. Okay, interesting. I need to do more research. Clearly, um, in the book, you kind of talk about this idea of kind of obviously kind of causing significant animal harm for minimal personal benefit, for things such as taste or convenience, two things that we've already mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, this intuition is very apparent on the face of it when someone says it to you, like we just have here. Yet it's very clear from lifestyle choices that it's often completely overlooked. So why is there this complete mismatch within society? Like what's gone wrong?
Well, I don't know. I mean, um, I kind of think, the majority of people are kind of amoral and sort of like, shockingly and disappointingly. If you're a conscientious person, it's shocking and disappointing to you. But if you're an amoral person, I suppose it's not. um, and it doesn't look that way to most of us most of the time because most people are not attacking each other and stealing each other's stuff. Okay. But actually, it turns out that the main reason we're not attacking each other and stealing each other's stuff is we're afraid of other people's reaction because because it's socially disapproved and or even because it's illegal. So okay, But if the social conventions change, then people will change their behavior. Right. So if it becomes socially acceptable to murder you, there's a bunch of people who would do it. It's very, disappointing to realize that, but we know that from history because there were times when that happened. And just like ordinary people, just ordinary average people, um, joined the Nazis, and like help to load their neighbors, into the train cars to go to the concentration camps. Right, because like there are too many people doing this for it to be only a few fanatics. Right, there are too many people supporting the Nazis. It had to be like ordinary people were doing. Right. So yeah. So you realize, and then with the Stanley Milgram experiment, you see that you could get average Americans. You could get about 2/3 of average ordinary Americans to electrocute somebody because a guy in a white lab coat tells them to do it. Right. That's what happened. If readers don't know what this is, look up the Milgram experiment. Milgram. Yeah. Like about 2/3 of people will go all the way. 450 volts, whatever, a person appears to be being killed or whatever, because they don't want to defy the experiment. It's not because they're malicious, right? It's not that they hate the other people. It's just that they don't have strong enough character to stand up to this other person telling them that they have to do something. And by the way, most people don't believe this about themselves. They don't realize that they're that bad, right? But they you only find out in the actual situation. So anyway, so what happens is, like eating meat is socially acceptable. So like, even if you convince people that it's morally wrong, the overwhelming majority of people will still continue to do it. Right? That's like in my experience of talking to students, like that is by far the overwhelming majority response is yes, it's wrong, and I'm going to continue doing it. And then I don't know how they explain this to themselves. Like, oh, I'm immoral. That's what they say, right? But most of these people would not. They wouldn't commit a murder in exchange for $50,000. I don't think. Um, so, but why? Like why would they eat meat in exchange for a little bit of pleasure? And the answer is it's socially acceptable, and murder is socially unacceptable. Okay, but that's, by the way, even if the murder wouldn't be found out, they still wouldn't do it because it's hypothetically socially disapproved, because it's disapproved even though other people don't know about it. You know that you did something that other people disapprove of. But when you're eating meat, you're doing something that other people approve of, so you don't feel bad about it. So okay. So anyway, to answer your question, people are bad. That's basically the answer.
Yeah, and you're kind of hitting it repeatedly just then, but there's this idea, I guess, of status quo bias. Like we are kind of always inclined to just believe that the kind of culture and the time and place that we're brought up in, raised in, live in, things are okay or things aren't okay based on our kind of like social pressures and social conditioning almost. And kind of, people from 100 years from now are going to look back on certain actions that we performed, like we look back on the actions of the Nazis or the kind of Soviet Russians and the sort of gulags, death camps, thinking that they were absolutely awful, and we would never, of course, we would never do that. But then we put us in that time and place, in those circumstances, then we would have been a guard at Auschwitz. We would have been the person to be rounding people up and putting them onto the trains. Like it's really interesting how society and social structures kind of coerce us almost subconsciously into performing certain actions. Don't know what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah. I mean, true, right? Like, most people don't realize this. Another thing to think about is, okay, like all of the students today know that slavery is wrong. And, you could ask them, so 150 years ago, would you have had slaves? If you lived in the South and you had enough money, would you have had slaves? Okay, and, most people think that they wouldn't, but of course they would. And the way that we know that is that most people in that position did that. And, there hasn't been enough time for like the genes in human beings to have completely changed. So the behavioral difference has to be based on the environment. There's been a change in the environment. So if you were in a different environment, you'd probably have the slaves too. The other thing that I was going to say is, the part of why we're not abusing each other is that we empathize with each other. And then, like when they're very young, children start to acquire the capacity for empathy, and they start to think about, or the adult says, how would you like it if the kid did that to you? When one kid punches the other one, how would you like it if he punched you, whatever. Okay. And then you're supposed to think about that. And then you're supposed to sort of like empathize, imagine being that person's situation. That's part of why you don't hurt other people. But it's just like, it's harder for people to empathize with other species. And it's sort of like, well, yeah, if we didn't have empathy, who knows what we would do, right? Like if you didn't have the capacity for empathy, you might just be acting like a psychopath all the time, because that's their problem. They don't. The problem with psychopaths is that they don't empathize, and then they just do any horrible shit just because they feel like it. Right? Like the psychopath would kill you to save 5 minutes. Like if you're in his way and it was just easier to kill you and nothing bad would happen to him, then he would just kill you. So anyway, so that's kind of like how we treat the other animals, right? Because for whatever reason, it's harder to empathize with a being of another species.
Yeah. And I mean, we even kind of view this kind of ourselves within our own species. We look at, if I've got a neighbor across the road who I see every day and they've kind of broken their leg and they're really struggling to get to the shops and to get to work, etc. Maybe there'll be like a WhatsApp group and the street will kind of come around them, give them lifts, etc. And there's this kind of big upheaval, or you see it on the news that there's just like a single named victim of something, or that we're looking for this person that's gone missing or whatever. It seems to be on all these sort of news channels. But then if you add 50 people to it, for some reason, adding more people to it means that the reaction of the individuals drops drastically. And then if you extrapolate it into another country that you've never even heard of before, and it's the entire country is starving to death, there seems to be even less empathy and outpouring towards those people. And then again, you extrapolate it further into a steak on your plate or some eggs that you're kind of currently cooking for food or whatever it is, another species that you are completely almost kind of pulled away from the process behind the scenes that's gotten the food to where you are. And I want to talk about kind of the origins of animal products in just a moment, but this seems to be really counterintuitive. This idea that there can be somebody on my street that I can feel very empathetic towards and want to help and negotiate around. Then if I hear that there are 50,000 people in this sort of place that are starving to death, I don't I just push on to the next channel and just forget about it. Like what is going on here?
Yeah, this reminds me of the probably apocryphal quote attributed to Stalin that a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. And why? Well, because you can't empathize with a million people, and you could empathize with one person. So, like, if somebody tells you the story of like the misfortune of a particular person in a vivid way, then you start to empathize with it and you start to sort of like imagine feeling that. But if somebody tells you something happened to a million people, you can't like imagine being a million people, right? And and the other thing is like, well, just there's a limit to how much emotion you can feel. So like, you can't um, you can't multiply. So like when you feel bad that one person got killed, you can't multiply that by a million, because it's just not possible to feel a million times worse, right? So like we just don't. Yeah, if you try to judge how bad things are by your emotional reactions, then you're going to drastically underestimate how bad a million deaths is, or a billion, or whatever, right? And so, and actually, I mean, I don't know exactly what's going on, but as he said, it kind of seems like maybe people judge it less bad, right? When it's a large number. Just maybe one thought is, well, something is happening all the time. It can't be that bad. It's like, because it's like the normal situation. This. I'm reminded of this science fiction book, The Three Body Problem. There's a particular part in the book, it goes by quickly and is not brought up again, but where they discover that actually doing high energy physics experiments where they collide particles actually destroys other universes. And then the aliens, the Trisolarans, want to publicize this among their own people in order to convey to them that the destruction of other worlds is a routine matter, so it's not a big deal. Okay, so that then there won't be opposition to destroying Earth. So, if you've been doing this for a long time, for like centuries, you've been doing these high energy physics experiments, and then you discover that the whole time, every time you do that, you destroy the universe. You're like, you should be horrified, but your reaction might be, oh, I guess destroying universes isn't that bad because we've been doing it. And I don't know. Maybe people think that if it was that bad, God would be stopping us or something. Since God is letting us do it, it must be okay or something. The world can't just be that bad.
So it's kind of mind breaking, really, isn't it? Okay, so we've already mentioned things like kind of the consumer kind of walks into a restaurant, they'll order something like a steak, or you're going to cook some egg tonight for food, or whatever it is we're doing, or buying some parmesan. I didn't realize this until my brother told me, but parmesan isn't even vegetarian. They use something from goats in it to make it more firm, I believe, or at least it has goat products in it. So I was shocked at that. But anyway, there are these products that we see in the shop or within restaurants, and we're very kind of abstracted away from the process behind the scenes. So I think it'd be useful to touch on kind of where most of our meat and dairy products and animal products that we might use outside of sort of culinary situations come from, and just specifically highlighting what the ethical concerns are around the process behind where these things are being raised and killed.
Yeah, I mean, almost all animal products come from factory farms. So the estimate that I heard was like 99%. And so, like, you don't have to ask if your animal product comes from a factory farm. It did. Right? And like, unless you have specific reason to think otherwise, it came from a factory farm. Okay. And, what's going on? What are the factory farms, right? Well, it's the most economically efficient way of extracting the most meat per dollar that you spend. Right. And that often involves just stuffing the animals together. So they could be like confined to cages where they can barely move for their entire life. Just like, you're in this little cage and you can't move. That's it. That's your entire life for 3 months. And then somebody kills you. Or sometimes it's just like a whole bunch of chickens stuffed in a shed together. And they're just sitting there in their own feces all day, all night for their entire life. Right. Because it costs money to clean the shit out of the shed. Right. And so what the farm workers would do is, but the shit could spread disease. So they'll just pour ammonia on the floor because that's easier than actually cleaning it because it costs less money. And so then the chickens are inhaling ammonia all day. And I don't know if you smelled ammonia, but it's not a pleasant smell. It's one of the least pleasant smells that there is, right? They have bits where they'll cut off a body part, of course, without anesthetic because anesthetic costs money, right? So like they would cut the end of the chicken's beak off, and there are nerve endings in the beak, so it probably feels about like somebody chopping off your nose with a pair of pliers. Or there's the thing, and the reason for that is to prevent the chickens from pecking each other to death, because when they're stuffed together in these tight conditions, they peck each other, right? Or they cut off the end of a pig's tail, again without anesthetic. So it's probably like somebody removing one of your fingers with a pair of pliers. It's probably about what it feels like. And the purpose of that is to prevent the pigs from biting each other's tails. And so, when one pig bites the other, the stub of the tail that was cut off, the victim pig will fight back, and that will prevent them from biting each other. All right. Okay. So, just sort of like, to me, this is like the sort of thing that a psychopath would think of. Like that's how we're going to do it. That's to achieve our goal. It doesn't matter how much suffering we cause. There's just like periodically there's just random acts of cruelty, which you wouldn't hear about, but every once in a while, some like activist gets into a factory farm and just like films stuff going on. So there will be stuff like somebody throwing chickens against a wall for fun because it's just fun, to hurt other creatures, right, who are helpless and can't fight back.
Yeah, I saw one of people grabbing chickens and then as they're going to be taken to get slaughtered, and then just ram them into boxes as hard as they could, like broken wings, broken legs, broken necks, and just slamming the boxes shut, and just whatever limbs and things were sticking out, they just got absolutely annihilated. And they're all laughing and joking, and these activists have gone off the farm and kind of pretending to be kind of one of them to kind of join in, and then with like a camera on their button on their top or whatever it is to kind of pull it up. It's I mean, if you have the stomach, which very few people do, to actually go onto YouTube and kind of watch some of these videos, you kind of get shooken up and woken up pretty fast, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
You have a really interesting quote in your book, Professor Huemer, and it goes by, the number of animals killed in 2 years of factory farming is greater than the total number of humans who have ever existed. Now, I put this out on YouTube and other various social media platforms and got a few responses from people saying, surely this isn't true. Like this number sounds absolutely incredible. So do you want to just speak to the
Yeah.
scale of the abuse and killing that does go on?
Yeah, no. So the statistic came from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, which estimated that we kill around 74 billion animals for food per year, and this is just land animals. So if you count shrimp, then it's a lot more. Um, and okay, 74 billion. So like the entire human population of the Earth right now is around 8 billion. It's estimated that around 110 billion humans have ever lived in the history of the species. Right? So a significant portion of the humans are alive today. Right? And you think to yourself, like, could this be true? Just so, I don't know. I heard that statistic, but it sounds awfully high. But if you think about it, just sort of like a back of the envelope calculation, you think, well, there's about around 8 billion people. They have around 3 meals per day. In the first world countries, anyway, they usually have meat at every meal. Okay, so 365 days a year, so that's around 1,000 meals per person per year. And so, okay, so there's 8 billion people, so there's around 8 billion thousand meals per year. So around 8 trillion meals per year. It's plausible that that requires 74 billion animals. Like that's not actually out of line, right? So, and people in wealthy countries eat more. So the average American probably eats around 2,000 complete animals in their lifetime, right? I mean, you don't eat a complete animal; you eat a part of it. Like over the lifetime, it adds up to around 2,000 animals had to be killed. So yeah, and then you think like, wow, could this be worth it? Like let's say we don't even believe in rights, but we just believe in utility. Like just do the utilitarian calculation, right? Like the amount of suffering we're causing, like that's got to be many times more than the amount of pleasure that we get. I mean, it's plausible that this is more like in a couple of years we cause more suffering to other creatures than the total amount of suffering that all humans have ever endured in our history, right? Right? Because like if you had to live on a factory farm, that would be the worst thing that ever happened to you. And so, and like the average animal lives about 3 months before being slaughtered, right? Which sounds surprisingly low. And actually, it's good that it's not longer because these are, months of suffering, right? But the reason it's so short is that most of them are chickens. Overwhelming majority of the farmed animals are chickens because people like eating chicken meat and they're kind of small. So there are fewer cows because they're big and whatever. Okay. So, so basically, if you had to live for 3 months on a factory farm, that would be like the worst 3 months of your life. The person who did that to you would be prosecuted for torture. And, in any country in the world, and then they would be in prison for a long time. Okay. And then, right. So, that happens to 74 billion creatures. And like, yeah, that is plausible that that's about the amount of suffering that all humans have ever endured, in a couple of years. So if there was something that we were doing that caused like all the suffering in human history, but it gave us the pleasure of like a little bit better meals for a couple of years, would that be worth it? That would not be worth it. Like that would not be remotely acceptable, right? Like, and as a matter of fact, stopping that thing would be the number one priority. That would be the worst thing. Like that outweighs war and famine and disease and whatever.
I want to invite you to join our community on Locals. There is a range of free and supporter-only benefits to check out. On Locals, you can ask guest questions, access the reading plan to prepare for upcoming conversations, get early access to all the full-length video and audio versions of each episode, and meet like-minded followers of the show. The link is in the description, and I hope to see you there. I guess this is a question that's it's going to be very, very, very hard to answer, but it'd be interesting to kind of go down this avenue, and that's kind of trying to understand the sort of weighting that we should put regarding sort of, I guess, moral significance against kind of suffering versus killing. Like, is it possible to give, I mean, it isn't, but like percentages against the animal's life in a factory farm against if the suffering endures and then the actual death that we cause? Like, some people are going to think killing something's worse than making it suffer potentially. So it'd be good just to kind of really hammer this one in.
Well, it's hard to say, and there isn't agreement among ethicists in general. So ethicists in general agree that killing is wrong, although I'm not sure they agree about whether killing non-human animals is wrong, just in itself, if you do it painlessly or whatever. Um, but there are different theories about why it's wrong to kill people, and there's not an agreement on it. Okay, but like a plausible theory is, well, they have a valuable future which you're cutting off. So if you kill a person or if you kill any living creature, that prevents it from having any. It takes away anything that it could have had, all of the goods that it had or would have ever. Okay. So then what about killing the farm animals? Well, actually, like if the animal has to live on, if you have to live on a factory farm, it might be better to be killed. like I think that's a life of misery. So actually killing them at the end, that's like the least bad part. Like, if only would have been better to prevent them from ever living in those conditions at all. Of course, you don't have to do that. So like we could raise them in good conditions and then there'd be a question about whether killing them was wrong. So like maybe the truly humane thing would be to raise them in good conditions until they were about to die of old age, right? Or something like that. And then you could eat the meat. I don't know if that would be, I don't think that would be commercially viable. Right. But anyway, like maybe that would be the ethical thing to do. Um, also, like, probably like killing people is worse than killing other animals, right? For somewhat obvious reasons, right? Because like the future that a normal human has ahead of them is much better than the future that an animal has ahead of it. Which is like, well, a human can just have much richer experiences and we can appreciate more of the world and whatever. And the animal doesn't know what's going on most of the time. So it's like, and, like they can have emotions, but it's not, animal life isn't that great. Okay. So, if you could, you're driving your car and there's like a pig over here and there's a person over here and like, whatever, your brakes have failed. So like you have to hit either the pig or the person, hit the pig. Right. Cause I don't hate pigs, but it's just like their life is less valuable, right? It's not as big of a misfortune. It's a misfortune, but it's not as big of a misfortune.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm kind of aware that the arguments that you're putting forwards in your book and as we're speaking now aren't necessarily to do with moral value or rights per se, but I think it's one that's often kind of presented by vegans or ethical vegetarians, claiming that humans and non-humans have, or non-human animals possess intrinsic moral rights or moral values. It'd be interesting to get your view on whether that makes sense. If those things are true, where do those things even come from? It seems to me a little bit counterintuitive, but I'll throw it back to you to this idea of kind of, intrinsic moral rights and values.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so there's value and then there's rights. And so the way I understand rights is if somebody has a right to something, that means that you can't take it away or interfere with it, whatever it is, even to produce a greater benefit for others. So if a person has a right to life, that means that you can't kill that person, even if killing that person would somehow save 2 lives. Okay. And like the lack of rights wouldn't mean that you can do anything, right? Like if there's not a right to life, that doesn't mean that you can kill people for no reason. But it would mean that you could kill somebody to produce a greater benefit. So you could kill one to save 2. Okay. So if animals don't have rights, I think the result of that isn't that, oh, just do whatever you want. The result of that would be, we could harm them if it would produce a greater benefit. Of course, we're harming them to produce a much smaller benefit. Like we're harming them to produce a benefit that's maybe 1/millionth as large as the harm that we're causing or something like that. So, okay. So obviously wrong. But it might make a practical difference. Like if you're talking about humanely raised animal products, then it makes a difference whether you believe in animal rights. because right, if it's humanely raised, then actually you're not causing a greater harm, so it would be justified if they don't have rights. And the only thing that would make it wrong would be if they have rights, because then you can't kill them even if it does produce greater benefit. Right. By the way, like, why would it produce a greater benefit? Well, like, if you're raising the animals and like they have good lives and they're getting positive utility out of that, and if you don't, if you couldn't kill them, then that whole industry wouldn't exist because it wouldn't be economically viable. So then they wouldn't have had those lives, and then all of the utility that they would have in those lives wouldn't exist. Okay, so like, right, so the argument would be like, actually, they're getting more utility, and the humans are getting utility out of the products. Okay, so okay, but anyway, then, so do animals have rights or not? I don't know. Nobody really knows, right? Although some people claim to know, right? But the reason why I say I don't know is that I don't know why we have rights. There's no general agreement on that, and there isn't even complete agreement on the fact that we have rights, right? Because there are these utilitarians who think, no, there's no rights. It's just all utility, just maximize utility. Okay. But anyway, among the people who believe in rights, there's not agreement on why we have them. And it is puzzling, right? Because like, if you're against killing, why wouldn't you kill to prevent more killing? Sort of like, the reason why you shouldn't kill a person is that killing is super bad. Okay, but then if killing a person is super bad, then 2 killings is super, super bad. So if you could kill 1 to prevent 2 killings, you should do that, right? It's like, it's a little bit hard to explain why you can't do that. Right? Okay, but anyway, I have at least some sympathy for the thought that, yeah, maybe rights only apply to intelligent beings, and for the unintelligent beings, only utility matters. So you should just weigh the consequences. And I don't really know why, but that just seems intuitively like that might be right.
It's interesting. It's really interesting. I kind of find the idea of rights to be puzzling. It's one that I want to explore more. I think there's just so many people that just believe and claim that we do have rights, and then trying to instantiate that or actually kind of work that through and kind of what those rights entail, it just becomes very, very complicated. I think when we were in smaller kind of cohesive groups, family units, and maybe a few family units together, it would have made more sense for people to believe stuff like that. But as you begin, then rights become more useful as you begin to kind of bring the world together almost, or you begin to form maybe counties, and you begin to form states over there, or countries. Then the idea of a right needs to be instantiated in a law to allow certain things to pass and other things to fail against kind of the sort of benchmark that we want to appeal to people.
Yeah,
I don't know.
like, so, this is a theory about why we have rights. There's like a rural utilitarian theory about why there are rights, which is, the rural utilitarian view is, well, the correct moral rules are the rules that would have the best consequences if they were to be the conventional morality of your society. Okay, and it turns out that it's just good for society in general to have rules that say you're not allowed to infringe on people in certain ways, and you're not allowed to do that even if it would produce greater utility. You might think, well, how could that be? Like, isn't it better to have a rule that says always produce the most utility? But no, not necessarily, right? Like, because if that's the rule, what that actually means is that people are going to interfere with each other when they claim that they're producing more utility, right? Uh, and you could see how that could go bad, right? The other thing is like, well, everybody is not necessarily going to go along with your attempts to produce more utility, even if you are producing more utility. Right. So like, if you try to take away my money because you claim that you have a better use for it, I'm not necessarily going to go along with that. And even if you're completely sincere and you're good at judging that, I will probably resist. And then there's going to be some social conflict, right? And, and I may not believe you that you're producing more utility, but even if I do believe you, I may feel like, well, I just want the money for myself. Right. And then, the other thing that happens, the big thing that happens is, well, if I don't have a right to keep my own money, I'm not going to make it in the first place. And like, so like, if people who built houses didn't have a right to control them, no one would build houses, because we're not all a bunch of altruists. So then there just wouldn't be any houses. And so we'd be living on the grass, or, in the hills or whatever. Right. So, okay. So like, yeah, it's a better system of rules where people have certain rights. Okay, and then if that's the rationale for why we have rights, probably the animals don't have them, right? Because they don't have this kind of social interaction with us, such that if we tell them the rules, then that's going to make them behave better. Unlike, it's not like we have to give good incentives to the animals or whatever by recognizing their rights.
I want to pivot to talking about sort of major religions, I guess, so things like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, I guess specifically Christianity here in the West. These religions often claim that humans have divine authority over animals. Christianity is very deeply rooted in the idea of rights here in the West, or the idea of kind of social hierarchies and structures. So I'd be interested to understand, Professor Huemer, how deeply you think religious beliefs like these have hindered the progress of animal ethical consideration.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's hard to say because um, religious people say a lot of things. Like they say that a lot of things are supported by their religion, but I think that might be mostly rationalization. And I say that partly because um, traditional religions support a lot of things that the religious people don't believe in. Right. Or, they might have believed in them before, but then when the social norms change and they don't believe in it anymore. Okay. So like you point out to people, okay, yeah, so the Bible says something about um, man having dominion over the earth. God gave us dominion over the earth. It also says some stuff like you should kill homosexuals, like you should stone them to death just for being gay. And if you talk to Christians about this, they do not believe that. Right? Like maybe 500 years ago they believed that, but nobody today wants to stone the gay people to death. That's in the Bible. Why aren't you doing that? Why don't you believe that? So what it appears to me is that people are they're picking and choosing. They're only quoting the Bible verses that support what they already believe or what they already want to believe. And then the ones that don't support what they believe, well, they just ignore that. Okay. Or like, oh, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe it's metaphorical somehow or whatever. Okay. But then what that means is that, well, like the argument from the Bible doesn't really do anything. Because then whatever you say about the passages about slavery and homosexuality and whatever, like, there's also the stuff about where you could get your slaves. So like, it's pretty clear that slavery was approved of. Okay. Whatever you say about those passages, well, why don't you say that about the passages about dominion over the earth? And by the way, it's way clearer that the Bible supported slavery than it is that it supports animal abuse. Right. Because, what does it mean that God gave man dominion of the earth? Does that mean just like torture everything? It's just like, say you have a family, right? And, you're going out to the store and you tell your oldest kid, okay, watch over the house while I'm gone. Does that mean, you're in charge of the house while I'm gone? Okay. Does that mean just do anything to that house? Just like lay waste to it, whatever. It does not mean that, right? Okay, so maybe when God said, you have dominion over the earth, maybe he meant take care of it, like, and all of the less intelligent creatures in it, you're responsible for them, not just like fucking abuse them however you feel like.
Oh gosh, yeah. If I said that to one of my boys, flew over the house and came back and it was like on fire, I would be, yeah, severely questioning what I said. Um, I want to ask a couple of questions, which I kind of feel a bit embarrassing asking, but they're ones that you hear kind of trolled out online, or kind of when you speak to family and friends about veganism. So the first one is the idea that kind of, I guess it's arguably okay to inflict pain or suffering on lower intelligent creatures. For example, something like fish. Um, so okay, let me phrase the example better. So it's argued that the personal individual human benefit of consuming something like fish meat outweighs the animal's individual suffering, and therefore it's okay to eat. So people usually tend to go for creatures of low intelligence to kind of begin to try and build a case that it's okay to hurt those things, because the high intelligent creatures, i.e. humans, high air quotes here, um, get more benefit or realize more benefit from it than the lower intelligent creatures understand their suffering. I don't know. What do you think
Yeah.
about people who push those sorts of claims?
Well, yeah, I mean, something in this neighborhood is maybe the most common thing that people say, right? But like, is that right? Like, do we think that your IQ, like do we literally think this? Like, um, say we could give people an IQ test, and like the people with higher IQs, their pain matters more. Is that right? And well, that's not true among us, right? So, like, like Albert Einstein, and meet some Down syndrome kid, and like Einstein would get a little bit of pleasure out of beating the shit out of this kid. Can he do that because he's like way smarter? Like, no, that's completely irrelevant. The fact that he has a high IQ is totally irrelevant. That doesn't mean that he gets to abuse less intelligent being. Okay, so why would it be different for the other animals, right? You start, babies in general are like really dumb. Sorry, not sorry for any listeners who are babies, but anyway, babies are really not very smart. So does that mean that their pain doesn't matter? That's kind of odd. Like, why? What does that have to do with how bad pain is, right? But anyway, yeah. And then just like think about the ratio of the pleasure that we get to the pain that we inflict, right? Because like the pain is probably like thousands or possibly millions of times more than the pleasure that we get. Right? Just I don't know, like that this thing that I'm not sure why it matters at all. You'd have to think has some kind of extreme importance, right? If we literally mean like it's IQ, right? But now the other thing is, actually, some people question whether fish could feel pain at all. So there's an article. There's this, I guess, zoologist James Rose who says that fish don't feel pain. Okay, and the argument for that was that they have different brain structure from us. Okay, there's a part of the human brain called the neocortex, and if pain signals do not reach your neocortex, you will say that you didn't feel anything. Okay, so like you have these nociceptors, like the nerves that detect pain in your body. If they get stimulated, but the signal doesn't reach your neocortex, you will say you didn't feel anything. Okay, the fish doesn't have a neocortex. All right, so the inference is so then it never feels pain. Okay, so that's kind of questionable, right? It's hard to say, right? But they do have pain-like behavior. They do behave as if they felt pain, which is the main counter argument. Okay, so it's kind of uncertain a little bit, but I would say they probably do feel pain, right? I guess because of the behavior, and like maybe it's just like their brains work a little differently from ours. So maybe in the case of the fish, it doesn't have to reach the neocortex because it doesn't have one. But anyway, be that as it may, maybe they don't feel pain. I don't know, but like if you're not sure, you should probably not do the thing. Right. So like if there's an action which might be causing an enormous amount of harm, but you're not sure, you probably shouldn't do it unless you have like a really good reason. The thing that might cause an enormous harm and, creates a small amount of benefit, probably shouldn't do it, right? If it might cause a lot of harm, but also causes a huge benefit, then yeah, okay. I understand that, but not for tiny benefit. Like say I like shooting my gun off in the woods for fun. It's just like recreation for me. And there might be some people in the woods. I'm really not sure. Like one of these stray bullets might hit them. So because I'm not sure, should I go out and start shooting the gun off? I probably shouldn't, right? Yeah, seems wrong.
It's interesting. I recently spoke to Richard Swinburne about the problem of evil. We were chatting through animal suffering and how kind of he's of the position that kind of humans and maybe other kind of high level primates have the right brain structure to be able to comprehend it and deal with pain, but other animals lower than that, let's say for kind of ease of distinction, don't have those right brain structure, and therefore the pain isn't the same. It's not kind of coherent in the same way, and therefore the problem of evil in regards to animals doesn't cause a massive issue to the goodness of gods. I just found it interesting. I kind of wonder at times whether this doesn't mean to sound rude, but different philosophers take the different ways or the different evidences that we have to kind of justify their position. I think what you just said makes the most sense because we don't know, therefore we probably shouldn't act as if it's just okay, like the guy in the woods. But some people would say hardline, we don't know, therefore it's okay to do it until it's proven otherwise. Let's just go for it. Let's eat as many fish as we can. It's just weird how we take the evidence, we begin to just apply it to our own presets. Sometimes it's odd.
Well, I mean, look, there's a lot of rationalization, right? So people don't want to change their habits. That's one thing, and like it's not in our interest to change, and also like we don't want to be weird. I think that might be one of the biggest reasons why people don't want to become vegan, because then you're going to be weird in your friend group, especially if you have conservative friends. Okay, but also you don't want to condemn your past behavior. There's a thing that you've been doing for 20 years. You don't want to say like, wow, for 20 years, I've been a horrible person, because that's like a thing you could never make up for. So it's like, if I shot my gun off in the woods and then later I heard that somebody was in the woods and they died, I want to believe that it wasn't me. Like, I want to, I'm going to start saying, there could be other people shooting their gun off. Maybe that guy got hit by somebody else. It wasn't me. And if there's any ambiguity, I'm just going to like insist that it wasn't me. Right. Okay. So anyway, like this is obviously irrational. Right. We wouldn't accept this in normal context. We wouldn't accept this if there was a human issue. The thing with the gun, like you wouldn't say, I'm going to keep doing it until somebody proves that it's harmful. Until somebody proves that shooting the gun off actually kills people, I'm going to keep doing it. But that's not acceptable, right? There's also that example is factual uncertainty. And so we're uncertain about the descriptive facts, like where the people in the woods are, if there are any. And we're uncertain about the experience of fish. Okay. There's also like moral uncertainty, I guess. Like there could be disagreements about whether, given the facts, something is bad. So, okay, well, if fish can feel pain, does that mean that it's wrong to kill them? But I would suggest that we should react to moral uncertainty in the same way. So, if you're uncertain whether some action is horribly wrong, just like, even if you know the descriptive facts, but you're uncertain about whether that means that it's wrong, we should probably avoid it unless there's like some strong reason to do it. If there's only like a trivial reason to do it, then you should avoid it, right?
Talking about moral uncertainty, then you very often hear somebody who kind of wants to defend meat eating for whatever reason begin to say things like, well, basically there is a sort of non-zero chance that we produce suffering by doing things like driving our car and hitting a squirrel or hitting insects potentially on our windshield. We've killed many insects as we drive, and that there is a chance that insects feel pain. It's very unlikely, but we can't rule it out entirely at this point. Therefore, you're a vegan. Surely you wouldn't get on the bus, you wouldn't get on an airplane, you wouldn't drive your car, you wouldn't get the train. I go down to London quite a lot. I live up in the north of England, and the train's like 3 hours down to London, and there's a crew stood on the platform of King's Cross with a bucket of water and a really long brush, and their job is just to kind of clean the front of the train to get rid of all the dead flies and insects. So anyway, people might begin to push this sort of argument forward that you're causing suffering to creatures that we have a non-zero possibility that they do experience some sort of pain. Surely you shouldn't be doing anything like that.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, like, let's think about what the argument might be, right? Like the argument, like, well, you're a hypocrite, therefore it's fine for me to just do anything, right? So like, suppose I was accused of murder and then I found out that my accuser was actually like an armed robber, had a previous conviction for armed robbery. And I say, well, you committed crimes too, so you can't criticize me. Now I'm going to go out and murder some more people. Well, no, that's fallacious. It doesn't matter. Like an individual deciding what they should do, it doesn't matter whether I'm a good person or not. That's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether I cause harm or not. Okay. But now, but the other argument might be, well, but, like it's unreasonable. It would be an unreasonably demanding morality to say that you have to not cause any harm or not even risk causing any harm at all. So, yeah, but therefore what? So therefore you can cause as much harm as just cause any amount of harm for any amount of benefit. Like that can't be the morality, right? Like if that's the morality, then, why can't I just like go around and commit murders and just whatever. Just be like a total psychopath, and, kill people to steal their wallets, right? Okay, it's got to be that it's got to be some kind of harm or wrong. Okay, now so if we can't eliminate all harm, what should we do? Well, maybe we should try to eliminate the worst harm, or that we could eliminate most easily. Like if there's something that's causing an enormous amount of harm for a trivial benefit, maybe stop that thing. And then if there's some other action that only might be causing harm that is much more costly to stop, maybe we don't have to stop that thing. Like we don't have to stop everything. You don't have to I don't know. You don't have to ruin your life, right? Now, like maybe the meat eaters feel like, oh, giving up meat is a huge cost, but it isn't really. It's like it's only hard at first, and I think it's only hard because you're not that committed. Like it's hard for people to make a sacrifice for morality if they're not that committed to morality, and like because they keep regarding it as optional. If you regard it as an option to do something immoral, and then like you feel like you have to struggle with yourself to do the moral thing, then that might be like an unpleasant struggle that you have to go through. But like once you've gotten used to it and that you're not going to do the thing, once you've established that you're not going to do the thing and you don't, and you've gotten used to it and you're not considering whether to do it, then it's really not hard, right? So like I've been vegetarian for whatever, over 25 years, maybe 30, I don't know. And, it's not, it's like, I don't have to struggle to not eat meat. It's like, there's no temptation at all, right? I don't go to a restaurant and then like, feel like, oh, I want that steak. That doesn't happen.
Do you if you were invited out to a restaurant with some friends and family and stuff, would you try and get them to go to a vegan only place, or do you happily eat at sort of kind of a place that serves everybody? How do you weigh that up in your practical living?
Yeah, I try to go to vegan restaurants. Yeah, I should be more insistent than I am, right? But like when people want to go to lunch or dinner, I suggest a vegetarian restaurant, and that usually works. So okay, but like okay, so sometimes somebody has planned a dinner or something like that, and they planned it at a regular restaurant. So I could refuse to go, but I don't in general, and I probably should, right? Like if I was a more thoroughly moral person, I would be more fanatical, right? Because think about like the abolitionists during the 1800s, and like we now think that slavery is beyond the pale, but it was totally socially accepted. So you have to imagine that everybody feels like this is totally normal, right? Like you see people walking down the street with their slave, and periodically they beat their slave, and that's completely normal, and everyone just like reacts to that like it's okay. All right, and then you're the asshole in that society. Like if you're an abolitionist, you're the asshole who keeps like going on about how people shouldn't do this normal thing that everybody does, right? Okay, but actually from our current perspective, we realize that the asshole was the moral person, right? And the more insistent he was and the more rude he was, the morally better he was, right? So anyway, like, if you were a thoroughly moral person, you just be constantly condemning it. You would refuse to hang out with the people who were abusing their slaves or whatever. And, you'd like Captain John Brown tried to start a slave revolt, he was a hero. Okay. But everyone at the time thought that he was like an asshole. I think he got hanged or something for that. So anyway, okay. We'll have to fact check that, but yeah, he might've been executed for that. But anyway, okay. That's to say I'm not as moral as Captain John Brown.
But you are more alive, which is good.
Yeah.
So the next three questions are ones that we've already kind of touched on, but I just really want to kind of hammer them home because I think they're quite important. So this first one's around the sort of kind of sourcing of of meat. So I guess if alternatives to factory farm meat, such as humanely sourced options, became widely available, would this shift in the sourcing of meat make consumption ethically acceptable, or does the fundamental issue of killing animals still pose enough of a moral problem to prohibit it?
Oh yeah, I mean, this goes back to the issue about rights versus utility. Like if you believe in animal rights, then you still shouldn't kill them, even humanely. Okay, but it's not clear to me whether they have rights or not. Like clearly, it would be a lot less bad, right? But what's actually going to replace the factory farming eventually is synthetic meat. So, and people are working on this right now. It's just not yet commercially viable in the U.S. Okay, but in principle, that's a more efficient way to get meat because, the current method, so thinking in engineering terms, the current method involves creating an entire animal when all you want is the meat. So in principle, you're putting energy into making bones and intestines and brains and whatever and things that nobody wants. Right. So it's wasteful in addition to being cruel. Okay. So one day we'll have this thing where you're just growing the meat. And then oh, well, that's going to make it totally fine. Right. That will eliminate the ethical problem. Right. I guess there could still be environmental impacts. Right. But, it'll be a lot less.
So the next one, I guess I really want to hammer into the speciesism element, and we've already kind of mentioned the level of suffering and death that factory farming causes compared to the total number of humans that have ever existed. And I guess I want to understand how embedded speciesism is within our culture, and then compare that to the harm societally that racism and sexism has done. And if we can compare these two elements, kind of, do we think that speciesism has done more harm in regards to suffering than racism and sexism, which is kind of predominantly obviously done within kind of human to human rather than human to animal, which is what speciesism is. So kind of how is it possible to weigh these two areas of kind of moral content?
Well,
I don't know.
yeah. I mean, some people laugh at the speciesism accusation that speciesism is like racism, right? Racism is prejudice against people of other races just because they belong to another race, and speciesism is prejudice against beings of other species just because they belong to another species. That's a real kind of prejudice, right? Some people laugh at that, but no, think about it for a second. Why can't that be? Right? Why wouldn't that be a prejudice that we would have actually? And there is a similarity, right? Which is that, well, it's harder to empathize with beings who are more different from yourself. So it was harder for white men to empathize with black men or with women, and that's why we mistreated them, because empathy is part of what causes you to have concern for others' rights and interests. So, okay, but anyway, you asked about comparing the amount of harm. Well, I mean, I think the amount of harm that we cause to other species is comparable to the total amount of harm that all humans have ever suffered from all causes combined. Just just like a few years, right? So, a fortiori is worse than the harm caused by racism. Okay, how would that be? Well, 74 billion animals a year, right? How many people suffered from racism? I don't know, but it's not 74 billion, right? And then, okay, and there's only ever been 110 billion humans, so. And then, okay, what we did to the other races and what men did to women. Well, we didn't stuff them into little cages and raise them for 3 months and torture them and then chop them into pieces to eat them. It's hard to imagine a worse kind of oppression, right? Okay, yeah, people treated the slaves badly, right? They're sometimes they would beat the slaves. So actually, yeah, they would sometimes torture the slaves, right? But nobody really would have thought, hey, I know, I'm going to just slaughter my slave in order to eat his body parts and chop them into pieces. And then, that would have been beyond the pale. Even among these horrible people, right? The horror, which I guess most people were horrible people. Okay. Even if you're horrible enough to think that it's okay to like enslave somebody and force them to work for you, it still would have been beyond the pale to slaughter them to eat them. Right. And so like, we think even less of the other animals.
If you're watching this, then I just wanted to let you know that you can access the same content in audio-only form by subscribing via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible. In fact, you can search for the Socratic Sessions in your favourite podcast app, and whilst you're there, please leave a 5-star review. It helps others to discover these conversations. All links are in the description, and thank you. That's fair. And I guess the only other point I wanted to make on this one is some people think that just because a chicken or whatever has been alive for 3 months, then killed, and humans can live 80, 90 years, theoretically, 100 years potentially. Even if you add those kind of times to the numbers that we have, the sort of amount of animals that have ever existed, the amount of total time that those lives will have inhabited, still vastly kind of outweighs the total number of hours humans have lived, which is one that's well worth remembering.
Yeah.
I want to dive into free markets and factory farming. Again, we've already touched on this, but I really want to push into it because I think it's a bit of a tension area. So I'm a libertarian. I really value free markets, but I also think the principles of free market systems, which often prioritize efficiency and profit, should be or could be held accountable for promoting things like factory farming practices. And there's obviously this tension here. So kind of what are your thoughts on this tension? Like, is it something we can overcome? Like, how do we get past it?
Yeah, I mean, the free market is the most efficient way of producing goods. Now, if the thing that you're producing is good, which it usually is, then it's great that you're doing it efficiently. But if the product is intrinsically horrible, then it's bad that you're doing it efficiently. So usually it's good, but occasionally it's bad. And well, in this case, and like a well-known problem that people have with the free market is the problem of externalities. So there could be, and this is one way to think about, the factory farming problem, right? There can be a product that you make and like it's beneficial to the consumer and that's why they buy it. And, the benefit it produces for the consumer is greater than the cost to the producer. And that's why there's a market for this thing. And great. Okay. We're producing that, but the process of producing it may also have effects on other people. So it could have negative externalities, meaning like it could be imposing harms on other people who are not consenting to it. So like the classic example is pollution. So okay. So let's say we have these coal burning power plants and they're producing power that people are buying and people like the power and that's good. But it's like, spewing CO2 into the atmosphere, which is contributing to global warming, whatever. And then that imposes a cost on everyone. So the coal plant that's doing that, they're not just imposing a cost on their customers from the global warming, like that raises, it pollutes the atmosphere for the entire world and they don't have to pay for it. And so they keep doing this thing even though it's not worth it. And the solution to that is to make them pay for it, right? So like, and this isn't even necessarily an unlibertarian idea, right? It's like, yeah, if you harm somebody else, you should have to compensate them for it. And it's just that in this case, in the case of like air pollution, it's really hard for the people who are harmed to collect. But if you have a government, then they could collect on behalf of the people who are being harmed by the pollution. Okay. So, okay, but what about the factory farming? And, factory farming also contributes to pollution and global warming and such, right? But the main cost I was considering was, well, it's imposing a cost on the other animals. And it's really hard for the other animals to collect compensation, right? Well, they're going to be slaughtered, so they won't be able to get any compensation. But plus, they don't understand, this entire system, so they wouldn't even be able to ask for the compensation. Okay, but if you have a government, like, well, they could do something, right? They could do something about this externality, which is, well, okay, well, what if the government charged the meat companies for the, you have to pay a certain amount for the amount of suffering that you're causing. Well, of course, then factory farming would not be viable. if you had to pay a fee for the amount of pain that you're causing, you call this amount of pain, you have to pay whatever. You have to pay $50, for each hour of pain that you inflict. Okay, it would be totally unviable. So then they would have to have humane farms. Right now, so like I don't think it would be viable to just like completely ban animal agriculture. Um, it hasn't, as libertarians realize, it has not worked out in general to try to ban something that almost everyone wants to do. That's not going to go well. But what they could do is they could make laws that make it more difficult or more costly to do it in a cruel, inhumane manner, right? Which could make it so that they do it in a more humane way. And right, so like that's what they should probably do, right? So I guess most libertarians would not agree with that, right? But um, yeah, but partly because like caring about other animals sounds like a left wing cause. Vegetarianism sounds like a left wing thing, right? But it's not really like you know being against inflicting horrible suffering. Like that shouldn't be a left wing cause. It should just be like a human cause. Just like if you're a conscientious person, you should not want to inflict huge harm for the sake of small benefits.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Um, okay, I want to talk about a few nutritional dietary things now that kind of you kind of see online. The first one is the carnivore diet. So there's two well-known proponents of this now, which is Michaela Peterson and her dad Jordan Peterson, who's very well known. They're both advocates of the carnivore diet, claiming that it's drastically improved their health. I'd be interested to kind of get your thoughts on such influencer diets. You kind of see someone like Michaela or Jordan kind of claiming that plant-based diets really hurt them and they had to go to eating basically just steak, salt, and then drinking water. That's kind of predominantly what they're on now. And if they try and add other things into their diet, they just become really, really unwell. So they only eat steak now, which is obviously cow, which is a very sentient creature. So what are your thoughts on these influences and the claim that plant-based diets are harmful?
Yeah, I thought they were also accepting like green vegetables.
Some of them are, yeah. I think Michaela Peterson's quite extreme in her diet, but I think Jordan and a few others who kind of go into the carnivore diet do like green beans and spinach and those sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw Jordan Peterson talk about this briefly, and he sort of said that well, he's not telling other people what to do, you know, which was like um, a remarkable moment of self awareness. He is not a nutritionist. He's not a doctor. He shouldn't be telling other people, or whatever. I don't know. You don't have to be a doctor, but he probably hasn't. He probably doesn't have expertise. He probably hasn't done enough research to know. And um, is it good for him? I don't know. Maybe he's like a weird person who benefits from that. But it's not really relevant to the rest of us. Okay. Okay. What might be relevant to the rest of us is like, is there evidence in general that vegetables are bad for you? No. I mean, it's kind of the opposite, right? Like, maybe that's what people want to believe, right? Because like a lot of people don't like to eat their vegetables. Okay, but um, like I think almost all nutritionists are saying like, well, fresh fruits and vegetables should be the basis of your diet. Like that's the most healthy thing. It reduces your risk of cancer, reduces the risk of heart disease. Um, Now, okay, is a purely vegan diet optimally nutritious? Probably not, right? Yeah, so like there's certain nutrients that you're going to be deficient in, so you have to take supplements. So it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient that like I have to take a B12 supplement, but this inconvenience is a small price to pay for not inflicting horrific suffering on other creatures for the rest of my life. Um, there have been some studies. There's a study that I looked at, which was finding that there were sort of nutritional deficiencies in different groups. Like, like strict vegans are likely to be deficient in vitamin B12 because there's basically no plant sources for it. For some reason, they were also more likely to be deficient in iodine, and there's a couple of other things. It was also true that there were health problems for meat eaters. They were just different health problems. They weren't going to have the B12 problem, but um, they would have other nutritional deficiencies. They would also just have a higher risk of heart disease, which is the number one killer, right? So it's like I don't think people are eating meat for health reasons, perhaps other than Jordan Peterson, right? Like, you know, maybe he's like a really weird guy. Or, I mean, really, like, I don't know what was going on. Like, I don't know what he was eating before that. So, like, maybe he was eating a bunch of artificial processed foods. I don't know. And it's totally plausible to me that we have a bunch of artificial foods that are bad for you. It would be weird if fruits and vegetables were bad for him. Okay. Um, or, it might be that there were specific ones that he had allergies to or something like that, or just had negative reactions to specific foods, but he wasn't sure which ones. So, like, he cut them all out, right? Um, it would be weird if he just had a problem with fruits in general.
It would be very, very odd indeed. And yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to kind of what you're consuming. Like if you're eating meat, but you're eating the lowest end quality meat, it's going to have more preservatives in it. It's going to be more artificial. Then that's going to cause you issues. But it's the same with a plant-based diet as well. Like if you're eating something that's heavily processed, that's full of preservatives, again, there's more in there. So theoretically, there's going to be more things that could cause you to react against or to have issues. Um, I would like to talk about offsetting animal harm for sort of somebody being able to claim they have I guess, an ethically neutral diet. So say somebody was to reduce but not entirely eliminate the consumption of animal products, and then they would begin to kind of find, say, an animal welfare charity. There's a few that are on an effective altruist site called Giving What We Can, which I'm a big fan of. If somebody did this so they could begin to try and quantify the amount of giving they're doing and the amount of suffering they're causing by eating animal products, could they theoretically begin to claim that they've got a ethically neutral diet in regards to animal suffering? Is that possible?
Right. Is that possible? Yes. Yeah. So it's possible that your diet would be ethically neutral, right? Or like it would be harm neutral. Um, is that a moral thing to do? I don't know. Right. Okay. Um, so people have this. People have ideas like this in the sort of environmental ethics area, like where okay, I want to go fly on an airplane, which is releasing pollution into the atmosphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy carbon offsets, right? So I'm going to do that, but I'm going to contribute to some environmental cause or something like that, and then that's going to make up for the harm that I caused. I guess. Then okay, and then the next thought is, oh, I want to eat a bunch of meat, so I'm going to eat some meat, but then I'm going to donate to animal charities that hopefully reduce the amount of harm that human beings are causing to other animals, that other human beings are causing to other animals. So no, so it's possible that you're successfully offsetting it, that you're causing less harm overall. I wouldn't be too confident of that, right? Because um, the charities are probably going to overestimate how much good they do because they want to get people to give them more money. So if you're going based on their estimates, you probably have to give more than you think you do, right? Now, then there's the ethical question though, like does that then make it okay, right? And so here's an analogy, like I would really like to murder someone. Okay, so what if I murder someone and then I donate some money to charity to save two lives, right? According to GiveWell, givewell.org, I got to pay whatever it is, $5,000 per life saved. So I donate $10,000 to charity. So I save two lives, and then now I can go murder someone. Is that true? Like, no, I don't think that's right. Like, so, um, if you donate the 10,000 and murder someone, then fewer people die. It doesn't mean that the murder was okay, though, right? Like whether or not you donated the money, you still can't kill someone. Yeah, and so like it's not really clear. But you might think that the ethics of animals is different. So because maybe you think animals are interchangeable in the way that people are not, or maybe you think that people have rights in a way that animals don't, and then maybe that makes a difference. So um, yeah, like you can't commit the one murder and then donate to charity because people have rights. It's wrong to kill one even if you save two. Okay, but the other thing I think is yeah, but like the killing of the one wasn't even the means to saving the two. Like right, like the way that you save the two people was a completely independent action. So you could have done that without killing the one. So then that doesn't make it okay to kill the one, right? So like if that's the problem, then I think it doesn't really work with the animal case either. Like, okay, you're donating to the animal charity, which saves a bunch of animals, and that's a completely independent action that you could do. Like, you don't have to eat the meat in order to do that. So, so like, eating the meat doesn't appear to be justified. I don't think, right?
Mm. No, I agree with that. I think it's really, really helpful. Like it isn't a trolley problem. It's not that you need to either kill one person or two people. It's you're going to save two people and then you're going to decide that it's okay to go kill somebody, essentially. Um, it's a separate act, which is, yeah, where it all hangs, I believe. Somebody watching this, listening to this, might be thinking, okay, I'm going to start kind of, changing my lifestyle, changing my diet. But then they'll come onto the internet, they'll do some Googling, they'll do some research. They'll hear somebody say something like one person switching to a plant-based diet isn't going to make a significant change. So what's the point? Just continue as you are. Just accept that eventually, kind of when we have lab-grown meat, people will begin to shift. I think Sam Harris has said this a few times that, lab-grown meat is going to be when he stops eating meat. That's quite a common view, I think. So if people do want to make the change, they might be overwhelmed by the reality that their single change might not make enough difference, or at least they'll be overwhelmed by people claiming this. But Professor Huemer, what sort of evidence do we have that a single person making their switch can actually have a difference?
Right. Yeah. So, like as I mentioned, the average American probably eats around 2,000 complete animals in a lifetime. If you don't eat meat, then what effect would you have? Well, on average, probably about 2,000 fewer animals would be raised and slaughtered. How do I know this? And like, there are some people who claim that no, you're not going to have any impact. They're just going to kill the same number of animals no matter what. And I think the people who have this view are basically confused and they have incoherent views, right? Because like if you ask them, well, like if a million people became vegetarian, do you think that there would be a reduction in meat production? Yes. Okay. And how much? By about the amount that a million people eat, right? Or so, say that there are 100 million consumers. If 1 million give up consuming the product, what will happen to production? Production will go down by about 1%, right? 1 million over 100 million, right? Okay, if the demand drops by 50%, the production will drop by about 50%. Okay, now there's some complications, okay, but anyway, roughly you should expect that. Okay, well, and then there are a bunch of other vegetarians. There are a bunch of people who are becoming vegetarian all the time, right? So, okay, so you could be you're part of the, let's say, million people, like, because there's more than a million vegetarians. So you're part of the million people who are reducing. Okay. Imagine that people progressively give up eating meat until a million people have given up eating meat. At some point, they reduce their production by about the amount that a million people eat. Okay. And at what point does that happen? I don't know, but it happens at some point, right? So there was some person who gave up eating meat and that caused a reduction, at least one, right? It's like, imagine that one at a time people become vegetarians in sequence, okay? That's not really how it is because sometimes it's simultaneous, but whatever, okay? At some point, the meat production goes down. So there was somebody who caused a reduction in meat production, right? Okay, and then maybe there are some people who didn't cause any change in production, right? Because they gave up meat, but the meat industry just kept producing the same amount. But eventually, okay. So what's the average reduction in meat production caused by all these vegetarians? The million vegetarians who are giving up eating meat in sequence. What's the average reduction in production? It's the amount that one person eats, right? Because the total reduction was the amount that a million people eat. And there were a million of these people, and some of them caused a reduction. So the average reduction that they caused was the amount that one person eats. Okay, so unless you think that you're somehow special, you should expect that the reduction in meat production that you cause is the expected reduction is equal to the average reduction. So the expected reduction in production that you cause is about the amount that you eat. Right, and there's just like no way around this, right? And like, so it doesn't matter if you propose that, oh, well, like what if the producers decide that they want to make 10% more than the amount that they expect to sell because they just don't want there to be empty shelves. So like that's what they do. They regularly make 10% more. So they throw away a bunch of meat usually, right? Not always, because once in a while there's like a surprising surge in demand and then they sell that extra 10% and that's why they're doing it, right? Okay. But anyway, so you think, oh, so most of the time, there's just like a bunch of meat being thrown away when it's about to go bad. So you could have eaten that. Okay. So that could be true. But also, like, even if that's true, like, um, if you buy more meat, that means that they have to, on average, increase their production by 1.1 times the amount that you would buy. Right. So, like, saying that the meat producers have this buffer zone where they produce a little bit more and then they waste a bunch, that doesn't prevent you from having an impact, right? That actually just multiplies your impact, right? It just means that the impact you have is about 10% more, right? So like if you start buying, then they have to increase the production even more.
Yeah, and very often people kind of think about the supermarkets or the food stores that they're going to, and the reality that kind of, them not buying their packet of burgers 3 or 4 times a week or whatever it is they buy isn't going to make a massive difference. And the reality is that as more and more people do this, obviously the supermarket is going to be changing its quota based on what's happening and kind of increasing its quota on sort of vegetarian and vegan options as well. But Professor Huemer, I've heard you say elsewhere as well that the reality is that as less and less meat is on the shelves, the people supplying supermarkets are going to lower their prices, which means that some meat eaters will actually eat more meat due to the fact that some people stop eating meat. That doesn't necessarily mean that us as individuals that stopped eating meat should therefore just continue eating meat or whatever. But it's an interesting conundrum. Obviously, eventually that will sort of dwindle down and fall away as more and more people change their dietary habits. But it is a bit frustrating to hear that
Yeah.
actually more meat buyers are going to buy meat
Yeah.
because of someone's decision.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's sort of like, assuming that um, the base, like default situation is me buying meat. Right. So, okay. And then because I gave up, other people are eating more, but you might think of it as, well, other people, like they're just deciding to eat whatever amount, and then I could join in and buy some, and then that would slightly reduce the amount that other people buy. Okay, now that's true, by the way, about products in general. So if there was like a baby meat industry, this would be true about the baby meat industry. And there would be if there were people who are eating human babies, those people would probably say, oh, the baby meat industry is too big to respond to my individual behavior, so it's fine for me to keep eating babies. Right. And they would say, if I give up eating babies, then the producers will reduce their prices. Okay. And by the way, that is true. And people have attempted to estimate the impact. So they attempted to estimate the elasticity of demand or whatever. So, and it depends on the product. Okay. But, you get something like, yeah, maybe um, maybe each steak that you don't buy, maybe that reduces by zero point 0.8 steaks, the total amount of steaks that get produced, or something like that, right? Because they'll lower their prices a little bit, and then other people will increase a little bit more, right? But like, there's no industry where it works that there's a complete replacement. That if you stop buying, then somebody else buys the same amount. There's no way that that works out economically, right? It has to be that when the demand goes down, the production goes down, but it may not go down by exactly as much, right?
I kind of got to hand it to you. You're the only professor of philosophy that's kind of made me drastically question both my dietary habits and also my giving habits. You've caused me a lot of pain, which has been a beautiful thing. Um, I want to I want to keep
Yeah,
going.
but I'm against
Yeah, well,
pain.
that's it. It's all your fault. I've got a few more questions left. We're getting towards the end now, but I think it'd be interesting just to briefly touch on sort of environmental concerns. People have environmental concerns about animal products and kind of raising animal due to the animal agriculture, the amount of methane that's caused, and that sort of affecting climate change, etc. Do you think that concern holds similar weight to the other ethical concerns that we've discussed thus far?
I mean, it's a much smaller concern, but it's much more, I don't know, it plays better with whatever left wing audience is. Yeah, so the meat industry contributes to global warming. significantly, and it's mostly because of methane production. So like these animals, whatever the farting and the burping releases methane into the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas. Okay, and I think that's a real problem. So I'm not a denialist. Global warming, I think, is really happening, and I think human beings are part of the cause, a significant part of the cause. I don't know how much, but whatever. And there are going to be significant impacts over the next century, and like however long we keep doing this. Um, but I think the magnitude of the impacts are not comparable to just like the animal suffering issue. Okay, so and if you look at like IPCC projections, so the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is like it's the paradigm mainstream like scientific consensus whatever group that expresses a scientific consensus on global warming. So like they have projections about the amount of harm that they're expecting, and you can't project very far into the future. Okay, but the amount of harm that they're expecting, they have things like, oh, maybe there will be in excess 250,000 deaths per year, human deaths per year in 2100 or something like that because of global warming. And, so I don't know if I'm getting these numbers right, but like it's sort of that order of magnitude. Okay, and in 2100, we're expecting the total deaths per year, human deaths, to be something like 91 million. Okay, so like 250,000 is not something to sneeze at, like that. That's a serious cost, but compared to the 91 million people, and it doesn't really compare to like the 74 billion animals that we're torturing and killing every year. Right, just like, okay, there will be significant human impacts, but they will be comparable to other global problems. They're not comparable to like the sum total of all human problems, right? Which factory farming is.
It's really well said. We look back at pictures of lynchings or other horrible events, concentration camps, etc., with obviously absolute disgust now. I'd be interested to ask, do you think our children's children are going to look back at photos of things like cookouts, grills, barbecues from the 21st century with similar horror? Like, how do you think those photos are going to age?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, just looking at our past, right? And looking at the direction that moral beliefs have gone and the reaction that we have to stuff that people did in the past. Like, we blame the people in the past and we think that it's horrible. And like, we can't understand how they did that. Well, like this trend is probably going to continue, right? And the trend of our moral beliefs has been towards liberalization, broadly speaking, and sort of being less cruel, right? There was a lot of cruelty in the past. Like a lot of the bad stuff that we were doing was just like inflicting harm and suffering on whatever members of other groups. So the natural extension of this, like expanding circle of moral concern, is that we start considering other species, right? And now, a big part of what's going to cause the change is synthetic meat. When it becomes commercially viable and it becomes perhaps cheaper than animal-based meat, and it might be better, right? Because like if you're you're genetically engineering it or whatever, you can make it have whatever characteristics you want. And so like they could make it the tastiest meat, right? They could figure out whatever you have to do to make it taste good, right? They could put the right amount of fat in it, um, and whatever. Or if you want it to be extra healthy, that could be the healthiest meat. Okay, so it's going to just win on sort of like market competition. And then after that happens, then people will no longer have the self-interested incentive to keep insisting that what they were doing was okay. So like the first generation that grows up just buying synthetic meat, they will probably have no problem admitting that the previous generation was totally wrong. Like, okay, like that's easy to admit. And then they're going to be horrified.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's, that's why I think it's Jordan P. Peterson that I heard this from says, any of us could have been a guard at Auschwitz. And I've already mentioned that on the show tonight, but I kind of hope those that listen back to this in 100, 200 years' time remember that any of them could have been meat eaters. That's my hope. Professor Huemer, where can people find you and learn more about this and other works that you've done?
Yeah, so I have a blog called Fake News on Substack, Fakenous. And, I have a bunch of books like this one, The Dialogues on Ethical Vegetarianism, which, you could find my author page on Amazon. That's always good.
Sweet. Well, there'll be links to your blog, your website, and various books, as well as your author page in the description. So listener, viewer, check those out. And Professor Huemer, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a harrowing subject, but it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks for checking out this episode. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And make sure you check us out over on Locals. Cheers.